pay for that separately. That is important. Now, again, there's a trial available. If you wanted to use it, you can just go in, sign in with your account, and then you basically go and sign up for the trial. It's very easy to explore these nowadays because the trial is available for each one of them for most part. But again, you have to understand what are the capabilities, but because there will be questions in the exam at least where you need to identify between, like, should I use Defender for Identity? Should I be using Defender for Identity or Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, or I should be using both? Now, this one is actually relatively simple, in my opinion, to explore because basically what it does, it basically run, some sort of like agents, and then you basically get the information out, and then it basically set the activities and the alerts and the metadata from the devices and the network goes into the M365 Defender. So again, the idea is same, that you're getting the sensory data in, and then you're basically getting into the Defender. Now again, typically the way you wanted to deal with this is like there would be some alerts directly coming from Defender for Identity. For example, your domain controller has some activity that's found malicious, right? Then there would be an alert, and most likely by default an incident created by the Defender, M365 Defender for you to look into, where the domain controller lateral movement is directed. So something like that on those lines. So the other way is that you think about it is that you get this data into the M365 about the domain controller, ADFS. Your basically domain controller means that ADDS, like Active Directory Services here. Then you can basically combine that data with the other endpoints, right, and see if this is a broader pattern here. And again, for that, you will be using the threat hunting capability that we saw. Again, we'll look into KQL tomorrow, so we're going to have a little bit more KQL-based demos. It's hard for me to show you like all the KQL now and get into advanced topics, but I do wanted to cover KQL tomorrow in detail, like start from the scratch, and we'll get to a point where we'll do some decent amount of hunting, at least at the intermediate level, not too advanced because that's not part of the exam, but you will get a sense like how to do it. Okay, so again, summary slide for you, just so if you're prepared for the exam, it will come handy if you just want to get a snapshot. So it basically integrate in the M365 portal exactly with like the other ones. It definitely have, I would say, the surface area is specifically focusing on the Active Directory and ADFS, so you will get the signals from that side. Then they're always going to be Active Directory in the middle for most practical implementations, unless you just basically, for some weird reason, you don't have that in the middle. Because typically there is this sort of like a hybrid identity scenario where the accounts are syncing in some way, but in certain cases they may not be. But in most cases there is that sort of like a connectivity happening. So you're always going to have the Azure Active Directory in the mix, and then it will come into the picture, especially when you have the hybrid or the cloud-only identities. Now, this is the topic that you will actually see quite a lot in the exam, the Azure Active Directory Identity Protection and or with the identity for Defender. And the reason is that the Azure Active Directory, what happens here is it actually have the identity protection built in. So you don't need Defender for Azure Identity, Azure AD, Identity Protector, something like that. It's already built in. So that's why you don't see the Defender name here, but it's performing essentially the similar task, right? Now, how it works here is interesting because you don't have to install any agent or something like that. It's all built in. Now, the way it's built in is through the identity protection feature, which is part of the Azure Active Directory P2. So I will do actually an end-to-end demo for you. So I want you to actually go through this. But I will just explain real quick how it works, right? So basically the concept here is that there's some risks that are associated with the sign-in or the user. So when you basically, let's say, sign in into the portal, let's say you're signing in using a machine which is new, then it will detect that. It will say, well, this is a new machine. Maybe this is a suspicious activity. It will put, let's say, a low risk with it. So there are different type of risks, low, medium, and high. And then there's associated with the sign-in or associated with the user. The point here is that it basically going to give you an opportunity to detect these, like find them, and then investigate like what's going on, and then remediate them. So usually the way you actually think about it, I will just use this diagram and then I will go through the demo, is that what happened if there is some malicious activity happening. So there are different ways to remediate that. Let's say the user account is compromised or there's a password credential leak or something like that. Then once you get the signal in the Active Directory, and I'll talk about these in a minute, you can actually go as an admin and you can actually perform a task on that particular user to remediate the risk, right? You can say, well, reset the password to bring the risk down to normal, or you can have a self-remediation workflow. So let's say user is signing in, and every time when the sign-in risk is high, you want them, or the user risk is high, you want them to actually perform a password reset, which is like a pretty important move, because now you're asking user to perform multi-factor and the password reset with it to basically mitigate or remediate the risk. So it kind of depends like what flow you choose. I will talk about it in the demo, like which one. But let's talk a little bit about the type of risks, right? And what they are and how they are categorized. So the user risk is one of the prominent ones. So this is the risk that is a sort of like a cumulative risk associated with the user identity. And it basically tells you like it's basically categorized the high, medium, low, but it basically captures like unusual behavior or the lead credential. It's like something that you can aggregate offline also. So let's say the user even didn't like sign in, but let's say that their credentials were leaked in the dark web or somewhere, right? There's a credential leak happen all the time. Then basically the Azure Active Directory will put them at a high or maybe a medium risk depending on the breach. That is basically how the user risk will work. The sign-in risks are actually what I call the proactive risks, right? Like you're basically signing in, and that's how you're going to get them. Now, this is like a full list. I just there's more to it. This is just a summary list that I put in here from their documentation. But you have the different type of risks, right? So you're signing in with the unfamiliar sign-in properties, meaning like you're signing, let's say I'm signing in right now from New York, and then I use some sort of like a VPN, like an anomaly, like a Tor. Then basically there's just like an anonymous IP address and unfamiliar properties, right? So if one of these risks will come up over there, and then it will add to the risk for the particular user. There are others that are very specific. For example, malware linked IP address. This happens when you find yourself clicking on a link, or maybe there's actually not clicking on the link. The sign-in is coming from an IP address that is associated with a malware. Maybe a campaign is running for the malware, and then the address associated with that. And then that is something that you need to take care of. Now, all these things are actually available within the Azure Active Directory, and eventually they land into the logs. So what I'm going to do is I will show you how to work with these type of signals and how do you remediate as an administrator. I think it goes through. So I hope everyone can see my screen. What we have is the Microsoft Azure portal right here. And I will go into the Active Directory. I will show you a few things real quick. The first thing you really need for this is you need to have the Azure AD Premium P2 license. If you have not worked with Active Directory before, then I will just quickly show you. If you go into the licenses and then you wanted to get P2, right? Then you will say get a free trial. And then what I would recommend you to do is actually go and activate Enterprise Mobility and Security plus E5. This will give you not only the P2, but it will also give you some of the other security-related features that you may be working with when you're working with the S200 exam. So it's just sort of like a bundle. Alternatively, if you just want identity protection and features in the P2, then you go with this one. Now, I already have that, so you can see that it's basically giving me an option to purchase it. But I actually enable the trial for my test account. So that's why it's basically giving me this. Now, I will show you a little bit what's going on into my environment first. So I have a couple of users I have Adam and Sarah. These are my test account that I use. And then I have the admin account. I just call it SC200 to remind myself this is for this training. And I'm actually logged in as a global administrator, right? That's why I can do a lot of activity. For example, I can go into the Adam's account, and then I can reset his password and things like that. So I have a pretty good control around those things. What I'm going to do is that I will go in here for the identity protection. We'll go into the security. Scroll down here a little bit. I want to get into this report tab. Now here you will have two major options, right? One is the risky users. These are all the users that are at risk. And you can toggle, right? You can see in the past if you have remediated a particular user, and I did. I'll talk about that, how you do that. But what is important for you is to understand how this works. The way it works is that the Sarah and Adam, both at some point, Sarah right now and Adam in the past, have a risk, right? And how they get the risk, it depends, right? So one thing I can do is that I can click on the risk directions, right? And it will show me the history, right? What's going on. Now, in this particular case, there's a direction like an offline, like a password spray attack happening to Sarah's account. Now, this doesn't involve Sarah herself. Unlikely that she's performing password spray for herself. I actually did that as a part of the test, right? But if I click on it, it will tell me that this is the identity protection based source that directed that. It's offline, meaning this is not a real time. And this is related to the sign-in, but they did that offline, right? They found out. They run some analytics, maybe, and then they found out that, there's an attack happening. But there are other attacks that are more real-time. For example, we have the sign-in. There's a real-time sign-in, and then because of the anonymous IP address. Now, anonymous IP address are typically like a Tor browser. I actually did, in fact, use a Tor browser. So that's why basically tagging it as anonymous is an easy way to test it. And then associating a medium risk. Now, that is something as an admin that you expected to do, like figure out. But what you do, right? And by the way, just clicking on the risky sign-ins here, it will give you all the risks associated with the sign-ins, give you the IP addresses, and then you can see that. I mean, if you're familiar with Tor, and this IP address belongs to Tor, the range, the nodes, and then I also have non-Tor based access where I actually did manage to have a risk associated because of the unusual location I have. But what do you do? So let's take a look into what you do as an admin. And we're going to cover that today. And tomorrow we're going to look into what you do as a user to remediate this. But from an admin standpoint, you have a couple of options. And I think one of the things that you may want to look into to protect the identity, because remember, this is in the Azure Active Directory, is how you wanted to look at the overall security posture, right? So as an admin, the first thing you should do is click on the user here and look at what's going on with the user. So see that there's a lot of activity. She's trying to sign in with different IP addresses. You can see that right up front. There's some pattern here. But what you can do is you can also click on the user detection. In the past, will give you a more sort of like a detection type here. Now, what you can do is you can say, well, maybe Sarah is on vacation, right? Because as an admin, maybe you have access to the manager and you get a word from the manager, or maybe Sarah yourself, you verify that she is basically in fact traveling and she's using for many purposes a VPN until the location is changed, right? So at that point, what you can do is that you can say, well, I can dismiss the user risk right over here. Now, what it does, it's basically going to clear the particular risk. But I will tell you, there are other ways to do that, and probably better way to minimize the state internally that is basically maintained by the Azure Active Directory. Because this is you as an admin making a decision. We absolutely have to do to unblock the user sometime, because you will see that when users try to sign in and you have a conditional access policies in place, they may have to perform the password reset or at least perform the MFA. So basically, you have an option as an admin. You can say, I'm basically going to say that this particular user in this state right now, I will just dismiss the risk, right? You can do that. Or you can basically confirm the user compromise. Now, why you want to do that? Because remember, these risks can be false positive. So maybe Sarah is not traveling, right? And this is actually a risk that you wanted to take into account and wanted to say that the user is compromised and further investigate. Now you can further investigate with the Azure Defender. This is basically Defender for Cloud. That option is there because again, you can we'll talk about the logs in a second here, but you can actually funnel the logs and the activities into the Defender. But you have other two options, and there are actually more tactical options right out the box for you that you wanted to use. One is to reset the password. When you reset the password, what will happen is that the next time when the user sign in, they have to actually use like a mechanism, like a self-service password reset. If you set it up, most likely you have to. That's a recommended practice. And they will basically going to reset their password. So you're basically resetting their password, but they will be asked to reset it again when they sign in. You can have the self-service password reset option for that. Or you basically downright block the user. So see like the spectrum of options you have. Like you have an option to block the user, like completely choke their access. Maybe because this is an important user and you don't want them to perform any activity at that point until the investigation is done. Or you want to reset their password, you force them to go and like at the sign-in time choose like something to go and reset their password on their own. Because once you reset their password, right, the password that you're going to get, you're not going to share that with them. Even if you do, they have to reset it again. So there are multiple options here, right? Typically, the way you want to do it is you wanted to look at the situation, like what's going on, and you wanted to coordinate. For example, if let's say, and this may come in the exam in that way, is that they will tell you that there is a user traveling or maybe there is a suspicious activity, right? But you don't really see much information here about like if there's a process running on their device, right? That is not, because again, this is Azure Active Directory. It may know their device because of the device registration, like Intune, but it doesn't really know if there's a process running in this environment, right? For that, you will need endpoint. So you will see questions where they will throw like information where the answer would be basically endpoint and identity protection. Identity protection will secure their identity and endpoint will secure their device. So it's not going to be just one, but depending on the scenario, the answer would be either or. Now, I will actually show you the logs, like how the logs look like, because this is something that you will most likely wanted to look into. So one way is that looking into the sign-in here and then finding the sign-in events. They're actually like more sign-in, everything related to sign-in, or you can actually come in and look at the audit and the sign-in logs. So the sign-in log is interesting. So I will just go and say last 7 days. So we'll see a little bit more. So we have like Sarah coming in, signing in here. There can be a non-interactive user sign-in. So again, if you are familiar with the identity protocols, you can actually perform non-interactive sign-ins too. In this case, it's mostly basically she's accessing the Azure portal. Now, I will actually choose Adam because there's a lot going on with Adam because he has also a lot of suspicious activities going on. So if you go in and click the sign-in logs for Adam, so you'll notice that he tried to sign in from various locations ranging from US like New York all the way to Eastern and Western Europe, right over here. And from other states like Russia, for example, in this case, from Denmark. And the idea here is that he also have to perform multi-factor authentication. So, for example, in this case, he's performing the multi-factor authentication because password change is required due to the conditional access policy. So we have a conditional access policy here. We're going to look into it in a minute. That basically asks any user who's signing in this particular case, only for Adam, just for testing, to perform the authentication and then perform the password reset. So you perform the, for example, authenticator-based or email or phone-based multi-factor authentication, whatever multi-factor authentication is set up, and then you will going to do a password reset. So you're going to do these two to remediate as a user a risk on your account. This is the only way a user risk can be eliminated. Now, this is important because there are other type of risk, like a sign-in risk, which can be remediated just by performing an MFA. But for the user risk, if I go back here, and we're going to click the risky users, and I will put in here dismissed and remediated. So these two options are by default unselected, right? So you're not going to get that. If you look at the add-on and you look at the history of the risk deductions, right? Medium there, do that. Yeah, no. Okay, here we go. So you'll see that the whole history over here, and then how they're remediated. So the important point here is that once you get into securing the identity based on the identity protection, you have two options. You can always go in, like I will just do it right now for the sake of it. I will say dismiss the user risk, and then it will say that the user risk will be dismissed. This section cannot be reversed and may take a few minutes. Usually it takes like at least a couple of minutes for it, right? So it will basically go ahead and initiate, and then you will see that it will basically going to be dismissed. And then when you click on it, like the details, when you see the history, it will come up as a dismissed too. Now, when you dismiss it as an admin, it's different from when you dismiss it as a user. There's a sort of like a difference over there. Okay, let me take a pause here. Let me see if there are questions that I can answer, or there are new questions. A good understanding of the capability. So I'm going to talk about that. I have a few demos that I will show you, like how to implement it, like how to configure it using Intune, part of it, and then how the inventory actually show up in the M365 Defender. We're going to talk about that. So that is a starting point. And then we're going to get into some of the other services like Defender for Cloud Apps, why it is, what exactly is its job. We're going to cover that. Then we're going to talk briefly about Defender for Cloud, what it does. So we're going to complete that hopefully somehow like in an hour or so, and then we're going to work on KQL skills. So KQL, Crystal query language, is an important part of the exam. It's also important for threat hunting in general. So if you're taking this course and just wanted to learn about security operations, managing threats and all that, and analyzing them, then Custo is important tool. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time there, because I'm not assuming that you know that. So I'm basically going with that assumption, and I think that's a fair assumption, because generally speaking, that's not a skill that people have. Anyway, so we're going to spend time on that, and then the last hour we're going to focus on Sentinel. Custo is part of the Sentinel, so it's of course aligned there. But Sentinel have few core capabilities that are very important. One is the actual security information and event management. So basically you have the signals coming in and you're analyzing. So we're going to look into that capability, like how you analyze what's going on in the environment, how you create incidents. And then we're also going to review capabilities like advanced threat hunting using Python based notebooks. So that capability also exists. It's a little bit advanced topic, and I don't think we need to go in like detail, like all advanced things, but you definitely want to know how to set it up, what it is, and why you need it. And finally, we're going to close by looking into some of the playbook related, which is basically you have some automation in place to close the incidents. So we're going to talk about those things. So I'm excited. This is a second day, and I hope that you find it productive. Just a quick reminder. So I will take questions in the Q&A.